to another program in a series of noon lectures sponsored by the Associated Student Speakers Program. Today's speaker is an alumni of UCLA. He was a track and a football star when he was here. And then he was a 21-year veteran of the Los Angeles Police Department, and currently he's a Los Angeles councilman. Directly following today's speech, he will be on the legal forum up at the law school in room 1345. We have set up 2 mics on either side of the room for questions. If you'll line up at the mics, we'll alternate in questions. And therefore, it gives me great pleasure to introduce candidate for the mayor of Los Angeles, Councilman Thomas Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Marks. Good afternoon. This is quite an experience to return home. And when I was on this campus, it seems to me that our whole student body wasn't much larger than this room. Things have changed considerably, not just in terms of the numbers, but in terms of the pace of activity, in terms of the concern of the people and especially the students. And it's therefore an invigorating kind of experience to come back and to have a chance to talk with you, to give you some of my ideas and to respond to your questions. I was asked if I'd make an announcement, before I forget it, that on Saturday morning, the students for Bradley will have a rally on the steps of City Hall at 11 a.m. And we invite any and all of you who are interested to come down and let us rock City Hall a little bit. That's what we're trying to do in the course of this campaign, to put on the pressure, to say what we propose to do about changing things. And one of those efforts will be to shake up the establishment, to indicate a new direction, and even one which approaches a revolutionary fervor in terms of dramatically changing the system so that it is responsive to the needs of all people, not just the few, or not just the special privilege, but to every man. Senator Robert Kennedy once said, "Above all, the spirit of youth is the conviction of possibility, the knowledge that we're not bound in chains of impotence, and that with courage and energy and purpose, we can build a better nation and attain a peaceful world." Now, some politicians, as well as some of our other leaders, may not agree with that. Certainly, some have little faith in the spirit of youth. But I also think they have little understanding of it. For those who would advocate repression as the first and only response to the student protests throughout not just the campuses in California, but throughout the nation, fail to understand what is on the minds of our young people today. They fail to understand why young people are concerned about the system, why they feel that it is sometimes irrelevant to their needs, and why it is not responsive to the times. I spoke with a group this morning in which I made some statements about the unrest on our campuses and suggested that one of the things that we needed was communication and dialogue to get some ideas from our young people, because I feel that they know what they want and that they have some excellent ideas. I think that we have produced the brightest, most energetic, most idealistic generation of young people ever in the history of this nation. And I am convinced that the kind of fervor which we see on our campuses today is not just a passing fad, that it is something which is here to stay. A spirit of determination on the part of young people to dramatically change the system, and change it not just during the course of the lifetime of their children or grandchildren, but to change it today, here and now, and all of it. And one of the men who was in that audience said to me, "Well, what makes you think that these young people who are under the age of 21 have the maturity to make a judgment, to even dare to tell us what should be done about the system?" Well, I said to him that age has no monopoly on wisdom. And as I talk to young people today, even on our high school campuses, to say nothing about the college and university campuses, I'm convinced that our young people today are perceptive, that they have some excellent ideas. More than that, that they have a right to exercise some influence on the system which is going to affect their lives, not just during the course of their 4 years on campus, but to affect their lives from that point until they are in their graves. That's the reason it's important that we listen to young people, and more than that, that we respond to them. I'm convinced also that government has lost touch with the young people. There is a credibility gap that has turned off many of our youth. Obviously, they are out of touch and certainly not responsive to the needs of the black, or the Latin Americans, or the poor, or even the old. Government has lost contact with the business establishment. That's the reason that in our fragmented, kind of divided society, that we are unable to respond to crisis when it occurs. We need not only understanding, but an abiding commitment to begin to deal with the problems that affect our society. I think it's easy to understand why there's unrest in our streets and unrest on our campuses. And only when we begin to understand the fundamental reasons for that unrest are we going to be able to make a proper response to it. Only then are we going to get the kind of peace and security that all of us want in our city, and in our nation, and in the world. Now, this is not going to come not fast, not soon, but in fact it can be changed. And I'm convinced also that there can be a dramatic change, not just one which is the course of gradualism that we've known over the years. I'm also convinced that lawlessness and violence is not the appropriate means to bring about change. But I would quickly point out that those who see violence and lawlessness as something so evil and something so new to our society that they reject not only that as a tactic or a technique for bringing about change, but reject also, unfortunately, the just grievances along with those that may be unjust. They seem to forget that this nation was born out of a sense of violence, out of a sense of demonstration on the part of those who were involved in the Revolutionary War against Great Britain. And they did not look so much to Great Britain to see whether or not they agreed with their tactics or their techniques. They were simply interested in change. The suffragettes who were seeking equality of opportunity for women at the ballot box were not concerned about what people thought about their demonstrations or their tactics or techniques. They simply wanted justice for women as well as men. Those in organized labor who were involved in the dramatic confrontations with management as they sought self-determination and equal rights and human rights for the working man were not concerned with whether society at large agreed with their tactics or their techniques. So let us not get hung up on the fact that we may disagree with the way in which young people go about seeking change. Let's look to the more fundamental issue, whether or not in the first place we ought to understand the nature of these grievances, and secondly, whether or not we're going to respond to them. I believe that we have seen evidence of some change in this country, and I would point to the year 1968 as one of the most dramatic of the political years that we have seen in this country. And we can start with the gloom that pervaded our whole country in the early part of January. And then we began to see a change, coming slowly at first in New Hampshire. And then with the dramatic announcement by President Johnson that he would not be a candidate for renomination by his party. And we saw the entry of Senator Robert Kennedy into the fray, and ultimately the kind of free discussion dealing with the issues not just of Vietnam, but of poverty and of the problems of our urban centers across this nation. It was through that kind of dramatic presentation, that kind of dialogue, that we began to see a change in terms of attitudes on the part of the general public, and it was a healthy situation. Then, of course, during the August conventions, we saw again some significant changes occurring within the Democratic Party. And I attended that convention, and I must tell you that I was demoralized for a time. I was agonizing over what I saw not just outside of the convention hall, but the kind of manipulations that went on inside that hall by the Daley forces and his cohorts. But I did begin to see some evidence of hope, because there were, first of all, the free and open discussions dealing with the plank on the war in Vietnam. And though we lost that battle only by a small majority, I think that we open up the discussion for all the world to see. We indicated how many people in this country were concerned about that war, its immorality, its illegality, with the impact that it was having not just on our young boys who are being sacrificed over there, but in terms of the denial of those of us here in this country to those resources that we pour down the rat hole in Vietnam, which should be poured into reconstructing our cities, into building a better life here. And then, of course, there was a rejection of the unit rule. And there was a dramatic change in the way that the party structure was to be operated, not just during the course of a convention year or an election year, but throughout, from the local level to the county level to the state as well. And is it that kind of change that we find necessary in our party to bring about a better involvement of all people, so that the process is in fact responsive to the needs of all people, that it is more nearly a democratic process rather than one which is manipulated. We saw, of course, a determination that all people be represented at that convention. And though only one delegation was thrown out, others were threatened. And the fact that they were threatened, I think, says something to them. And I'm convinced that 4 years or 3 years from now, when we come back to our next convention, there will not be that kind of effort on the part of so many of our states, not only in the South, but we find this problem in other sections as well. And of course, we saw the emergence of some bright new faces at that convention. Julian Bond, Senator McGovern, Senator Muskie, and now the emergence of Senator Edward Kennedy. These men represent the hope for not just the Democratic Party, but they represent the hope for America. And it is through that kind of young, vigorous, progressive voices that we are going to see a change in this nation. We saw a change in terms of the involvement of young people, not just during the course of the McCarthy and Kennedy campaigns, not just during the course of that convention where they were outside the halls, but I think an involvement, a commitment on the part of young people that they are going to change the system from inside. And the majority feel that they do not have to destroy it, they don't have to tear it down, that change can be effected from within. Now, you never saw a football game that was won from the sidelines or from the grandstands. And the activity of the young people indicated they feel they must be in the fray, on the field, involved in that battle if they're going to affect its outcome. And that, I think, is a heartening sign. We see also, during the course of this campaign that we're now in here in the city of Los Angeles, that it's possible to challenge the political system and to effect a change, not just throughout the nation, but locally as well. I'm concerned that we are very much involved, and we are eager to look at our candidates if they are going to the White House or going to the Senate or to the House of Representatives, And we sometimes even look carefully when they're going to the governor's chair in Sacramento. Perhaps we don't look well enough, but I think we are beginning to take a careful look and to make a kind of mature assessment of these men. But it's essential that we begin to look at City Hall, where the leadership makes a difference in our lives every day. And it's local government that affects your lives in every way by the actions that they take at the local level. And so we must begin to seek the caliber of men, the kind of character, the integrity, the honesty, the creativity, the innovation that is necessary to change city government. When we do that, we're then going to be able to affect the other levels of government as well. We're attempting to indicate during this campaign a desire, even a determination, to involve young people, not just during the course of the campaign, in an effective way to begin to solve the problems of government as they relate to young people. And I think we must begin that search on our college campuses. If we're going to improve the quality of life in our communities, we have to start where the service is rendered, and that's those who are in public service, whether they be civil servants or whether they be elected officials. And we must seek better caliber of men and women. And I think we must turn to our colleges and universities for that kind of talent, for that kind of interest. And we will not automatically attract such young people. We must engage in a search for them. We must make it possible during the course of your experience here on the campus, and what I would describe as the living laboratory, to open up the whole business of engaging in a search for new directions, and playing with ideas, and experimenting at a point where it is not going to be catastrophic if you make a mistake. Life is really an experiment. Sometimes when we make a mistake later in life, we cannot undo it. But make that mistake here in the living laboratory on campus, and you have an opportunity to recover. More than that, you can provide for what I call the creative cutting edge of our society, that ability to suggest change. And again, I want to remind those who have some reservations about ideas of young people. The perceptive ideas of young people have always been at the forefront of change in our society. And there's no reason to think that today, when the communications media makes it possible for instant communication and instant knowledge to a greater degree than ever in the history of this country, there's no reason to believe that we now are not better prepared with a better kind of young people to have the knowledge that would provide for constructive change. I think we must continue the thrust that was begun by President John F. Kennedy when he has sought to establish a new confidence in government, when he tried to bring to government a core of bright, eager, energetic, disciplined young people with integrity, young people with ideas. Now, we have some student or youth committees functioning at various levels today, but they're really only a kind of paper organization. They're window dressing. They not only do not seek the advice of these young people, they wouldn't accept it if it was offered. So we must provide for meaningful participation in government at every level, and especially on the part of young people. We must begin to establish that kind of communication, that sense of rapport, that young people feel, in fact, that the system does relate to their needs, and that when they give advice, that it is going to be listened to. I'm concerned about the matter of politics as usual, or the politics of expediency, the lack of integrity in government, the kind of mediocre performance that we've seen from so many political leaders. There simply is not going to be answer enough to our problems, and our problems are many. And I've heard one of our candidates for the mayor of Los Angeles talk about the simplistic approach to our problems. He suggests that there are 22 major problems, and he's going to deal with them in the first 22 days of his administration, taking a problem each day. And at the end of 22 days, he's going to solve all of those problems. And on the 23rd day, he's going to rest. Let me tell you that the problems of this city and any city in this nation are so complex that they cannot be dealt with in that fashion. I think if they were that simple, even Sam Yorty might have solved them. But let nobody fool you that you can take the simple approach. Now, this same man who talked about this simplistic approach suggested that there was an item in the budget that called for putting shotguns on our fire trucks, and suggested that, yes, the entire council voted for this. And I frankly didn't remember, so I had to go back and look at that budget to see where on earth did that budget call for machine guns and shotguns, and that we appropriated this kind of money for it. Because it was my recollection that the first knowledge we had of it was when the commission, or rather the fire chief from Louisville, announced that he was going to arm all of the fire engines with shotguns. And when that announcement came, and I suppose he thought he was in isolation there, that nobody in Los Angeles would know about it, the minute it hit the airways, I took action. I introduced a motion which called for an investigation of the matter in the first place, and we finally were able to cancel the purchase of those shotguns. But getting back to the budget, I took a look at that budget of 1968-69, and it's true, there was a line in there that said something about machine, dash, and shotguns. But this related not to the budget of 1968, and incidentally that was a typographical error, and the fire department has never yet been able to explain it, but they simply indicated that in the year 1967, there had been such a line in the budget, and $2,300 was appropriated for 2 shotguns and 23 pistols to be used by the arson squad. And obviously this was appropriate. They are armed and they are required to carry weapons. But there was nothing in the budget, not a dime for any such guns of any kind or caliber in the 1968 budget. And yet this same commentator had read that budget and thought that he had found something that he could use to attack all of us who were running for public office who had served in city. So it's just an indication that you've got to know something about City Hall and the budget and all the rest of it if you hope to begin to solve the problems in the city. And you can't talk about solving them in 22 days, and you can't talk about some simplistic suggestion that, well, I'm not in favor of any new additional taxes. He's disregarding the fact that as long as we call for the kind of services that we demand and need in the city today, you can't expect to make any significant cut in the budget. And you can't talk about not having any new taxes. I'd love to have no new taxes. I wish that somehow, by some form of magic, we could run City Hall and city government without a dime of taxes. But you and I know that this simply cannot happen. So let us not be deluded by those who offer the simplistic approach. It simply will not answer. And to those who suggest that they can better serve this city, I would say to them, you need a little experience here to know the problems, to even know where the doors are. There was one candidate who didn't even know who prepared the budget, and yet he's running hard. It is this kind of lack of understanding of local government that could create a greater chaos than we have today. We need a man of understanding, a man of experience, a man who knows something about the problems in the city in a fundamental way. But more than that, one who understands how to find the solutions, one who has the contacts and the communications stretching across all boundaries, dealing with all sections of our community. And I don't think I need to tell you that I know who that man is. Not only the 21 years service on the police department, not just the fact that I've been a lawyer in this city and for the past 6 years a member of the city council, but there are many experiences in which I've been involved, and I think it's a matter of the record that you must look to. What have these other candidates said, other than some item of criticism, What have they said or what have they done in terms of dealing with the critical issues that face us? And that's the way in which you're going to have to measure them. And you need to look at a man who has been involved in the fray in every way, not just during the course of this campaign, but throughout the years of his entire public service. That's the kind of man that I think we need. That's the kind of man who can make a difference in this city. One of the most serious problems that we face today is the matter of the abrasive contact between the police and certain elements of our community, in particular the young people, in particular some elements in the black community and in the Latin American community. And let me tell you today that the public at large simply does not understand this problem. And we are going to have to begin, first of all, to understand it, and secondly, to begin to deal with it. It's going to take something in the nature of a change in the approach that is taken by the commissioners who run the department, a change in the standards that we apply in terms of recruiting our personnel. And we have got to de-emphasize some of the physical standards of the past. There was a time when they talked about having 32 teeth, as though the man were going to have to bite somebody, or talking about a 4-inch chest expansion as though he had to be some superhuman athlete, or they had to have 20/20 vision in one eye and 20/30 in another. These are simply unrealistic standards today in terms of the caliber of men and women that we're looking for. We need to de-emphasize the physical standards and emphasize the mental capacity of the men we seek. We need to seek what I call lateral entry into the department, seeking bright young college students who have graduated and who have some specialty that they want to bring to law enforcement, whether it be in the field of juvenile activity or community relations or in the scientific laboratories. It is that kind of expertise that we need. And we shouldn't require them to go through that whole process of the blue uniform and the radio car and the walking the beat and all the rest of it for 4 or 5 years before they can qualify for a specialized detail. That's totally unrealistic today. And the President's Commission, which has studied law enforcement and its problems for over 18 months, made 200 recommendations, and that was among them. And yet our department has failed to respond to that simple and single suggestion. And I think it's about time that we began to move on it. We've got to begin to understand that the nature of the training they receive must be changed. This business of, in the first place, the psychological testing which is given when they enter the department is totally inadequate. One man cannot examine every police officer who comes on a job and hope to do an adequate job. But worse than that, the failure to have an adequate bank of psychiatrists at the entry level, worse than that, there is no follow-up evaluation of a man's emotional stability once he's come on the job. And you and I know that they're under tremendous pressure every day, and during the course of a 20-year career, some of these men crack. Some of them are no longer suitable for the assignments that they might have been suitable for when they first entered the department. So we need some follow-up psychiatric evaluation of these men, and especially when we have an incident where a man is involved in a shooting or some other serious incident. For example, a couple of years ago, we had a case where a man was fleeing from 2 officers who were in plain clothes in an unmarked car. He, I assume, thought that they were hold-up men, and he was trying to get away from them. Well, he finally was stopped at a traffic signal, and 2 other officers approaching from the opposite direction jumped out of the car, one with a shotgun in hand, tapped on the window of his car with a shotgun, and the man, apparently in terror, attempted to drive away, and this officer shot and killed him. Well, I said to the department, I think you ought to take a look at that man's personnel package and see whether or not he may have some emotional instability that would require that you remove him from that sensitive activity. And they finally responded. They did take a look and discovered that in the course of 2 years, he had been involved in 4 such shootings, and they did remove him. And they put him, they put him on the telephones where he's answering the complaint board. So the worst that can happen now, the worst thing can happen now is that you'll get insulted over the telephone, but at least you won't get shot. There is a need in the course of the training program to change the emphasis on the nature of the training. The orientation today is spent 90% in teaching them the techniques and the tactics of catching crooks. And yet when they graduate, 90% of their time is spent dealing with people. It's the people's problems that we must be dealing with, and they lack an understanding and a sensitivity to these kinds of problems. They need some additional training in this field. And I'm suggesting that we have continuation training required so that they get the proper indoctrination, so that they really understand the people they're dealing with. And I'm suggesting that we use the techniques of role-playing so that they are placed in the shoes of the other man. There's one smaller department in Covina that is trying a system of putting their recruits out into the field so that they're unidentified, so they get a chance to see how the other officers operate. And some of them have had some frightening experiences. One, as a matter of fact, said in response to the question, well, how did you feel about this? He says, my God, I thought they were going to kill me. Well, this has a dramatic impact on that man because he, for the first time, begins to see law enforcement in a different light. He sees it from the point of view of the person who is the victim of irresponsible and improper conduct. I think also it's necessary that there be a kind of realistic confrontation with all elements of the community, from those whom they describe as the militants as well as the moderates, so that they can tell them what the problems are and what kind of reaction they'll get when they engage in certain activity in the community, so that they will not come into a community that is strange and foreign to them as though they're an occupying force. They've got to begin to understand that mutual respect between law enforcement and the community is an absolute essential if we're going to bring about effective and efficient law enforcement so that the community can cooperate with them and help them in order for them to properly serve. We cannot get an adequate response. No amount of policemen are going to repress crime. It's going to take the involvement of all people, a total involvement of the community, and you're never going to get it so long as there is this hostility that now exists. These are only some of the changes that need to be made in that regard. I'm concerned about the kind of confrontations which we're having on our college campuses today. And I'm suggesting that the unrest which we see there is only a symptom of a more fundamental problem, and it is that fundamental problem that so many fail to understand. Our young people are saying today that the system must be changed, that it must be made relevant to their needs and to the needs of not just the youngsters on campus, but to the society as a whole. And when we suggest that there are certain grievances that should be dealt with, there are going to be some who will say, well, there were others who were so outrageous we couldn't respond to them. Well, let's admit that some are outrageous. But the fact of the matter is that in almost every one of these cases they have admitted at long last that a certain number of these grievances were justified and they should have been dealt with. And yet there was a failure to act. So let us not get hung up on the fact that some grievances seem to be outrageous. You know, any good lawyer is going to make an outrageous demand in the course of negotiations. We understand that if we're lawyers, but somehow if we see this on the part of young people, we forget that this may be a process of negotiation, that they may not in fact expect all that they ask for, but they want part of it, and it is the just demands that we need to be concerned about and we need to respond to. And unless we do, I'm going to tell you and this nation and this city that we are indeed in trouble. It is communication and dialogue that we need at a time early enough in the game that we anticipate the problems and that we provide an adequate response to them so that the frustrations don't build to the point where somebody feels that the only way they can get a response is to kidnap the president or to burn down the building or to take some other kind of action. And I want to quickly add that I recognize that there are some who have raised some of these questions and have spoken out who really are not concerned about constructive change. But again, let us not be dissuaded from our quest for justice, our search for change. Let us not be blinded by this or have our ears stopped to the fact that there are some just grievances that we must deal with. Let's not use as an excuse that some are outrageous or that some are promoted by anarchists that don't want constructive change. Let's not use that as an excuse. I'm convinced that in this city we can move toward self-determination. We can move toward reconciliation, reconciliation between men of different colors, of different racial backgrounds, of different age groups, of different communities in this city. I'm convinced that the total quality of life can be improved by this. What we need to seek is a kind of dignity for every man, a sense of justice, a sense of respect for each other. We must begin to be flexible enough and forward-looking enough to make these changes and to make them in a hurry. For as Francis Bacon said, "He who will not try new remedies must expect new evils, for time is the greatest innovator." We in this community are faced with a unique election, an election which is going to determine the course of history for Los Angeles. And with the right kind of leadership, a single man can make a difference. And let me suggest to you that you elect any one of those other candidates in the race, and the world will little note no longer remember what happened in the year 1969. But elect Tom Bradley and you'll make history for this city and for this nation and for the world. I think with that applause, I better stop. Who's got the first question?
Is this on? Yeah. Mr.
I
Bradley?
can hear you, yes.
Oh. Mr. Bradley, I liked your remarks about saying that we're going to have to do something about the police force. You're very aware of the incidents at Century City on June 23rd, and where the police attacked a group of demonstrators. Now, I know you condemned Redden for this, yet I've heard that you're planning to keep Redden on the police force. Now, as you know, that each officer who uses undue force is guilty of a felony, wouldn't it be more prudent, and can you say now, that one, in light of this, you will immediately remove Redden from office if elected, and two, you will prosecute him on felony charges to the full extent of the law?
The answer to your question is, in the first place, the chief of police is protected by civil service and the charter, and the only way that he can be removed is for cause. And let me also suggest to you that it's not as easy as you may think to remove anybody from public office who is under civil service. The commissioners can be changed, and I think that's where the fundamental change needs to be made. We must begin to approach it there. They are the ones who set the policy. They're the legal heads of the department. They determine the course of direction for that department. And I think they need to respond to the problems that affect our community. And it is there that I would propose to make the change. Who's next?
Mr. Bradley, many of us as students are living in the Venice area because of the low-cost housing. And I wondered if you have a position on the Venice plan and on public housing and low-cost housing in general.
Yes, just before I left the council today, I asked Ed Edelman, who wants to introduce a motion in connection with the commission's recommendations on planning, that he wait till I can get back, because I want to be involved in this fight to include in the comprehensive plan a housing element, an element that would have concern about the people, not just those who live in Venice, but all over the city. And I'm convinced that we cannot expect to have a viable community in Venice. We cannot have the kind of low-cost or moderate-cost housing if we change the zoning there to prohibit multiple dwellings. A single family and duplexes are so costly that it's simply impossible to provide for low-cost housing. And that's what is being proposed in Venice. And I'm totally opposed to it. not just there, but we've got to create, it's all right, you can applaud. We've got to create housing opportunities that provide for diversity so that young people, low income, moderate income, as well as the more affluent, are able to live together side by side. You know, there was an interesting experience engaged in by 140 students who came from all over the nation who were taking to Washington, D.C. to express their ideas about housing and planning. And it was interesting to note that when they created a plan, it was so totally different than anything the professional planners had come up with that it was hard to believe. They were concerned about all people, and in their plan, they provided for just this kind of mixture. And in the shopping centers and in the cultural centers, there was almost an inevitability that people of all backgrounds would be forced to mingle and to mix and to have communication. And so you see, it's important that there be diversity in our housing if we're going to bring about kind of communication that we talk about, if we're going to bring about the kind of reconciliation and understanding between all men. Now a question over on the other side.
Okay. Recently, there's been a lot of criticism of Senator McCarthy for his vote for Mr. Long instead of for Ted Kennedy in the Senate, which kind of brings to mind an election which was held here last June 4th for a very important political office in the county of Los Angeles, that of district attorney. There were only two people running in this race. One was Mike Hannon, an ex-policeman who'd been very active in the civil rights movement and whose campaign on other things centered upon prosecution of policemen in cases of police brutality, and on another for emphasizing real crime and not prosecuting possession of marijuana cases. His opponent was Evel Younger, who, among other things, was the man who went to the grand jury for the felony conspiracy indictments against the leaders of the Chicano school walkouts. And I was wondering, whom did you vote for in that election and why?
Well, the way in which you vote is a matter of your own conscience. So while I don't expect you to tell me, I'm not going to tell you, but I will add this, that I have been critical of the activity of the district attorney's office in connection with the conspiracy cases, because I think it is an overreaction to a problem. If, in fact, there were violations, at most they were misdemeanors, and they should have been dealt with in that fashion, rather than to build them to the importance of a felony. This really was designed as sort of a repressive measure to scare off any who would dare to even talk about or to think about some kind of activity or demonstration against the schools or against whatever. So I think that this was an inappropriate response on the part of the district attorney, and I've made no bones about it. I think that this is totally wrong.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, the reason I was wondering is I don't think it's any secret about who you voted for president. I was wondering why it's a secret about district attorney.
I think I've responded to your question. Yes.
Mr. Bradley, you spoke of reforming the system from within and wanting to shake up City Hall, and the only concrete example you've given us so far, I believe, was of police reform, which I agree with. I was wondering if you could give us some other examples of reform that you have planned or thinking about.
Fine. In the first place, there is a question of the integrity of some of our commissions and the way in which they ought to be appointed and supervised. There is a matter of how they ought to be appointed and serve in the first place, because I think that the present system of them serving as the heads of the department is not responsive to our problems, that they ought to be advisory in nature, and we ought to pin the responsibility where it belongs, on a single man, so that when something goes wrong, we can point to him. There is, of course, the question of how do we solve the problems of smog and of transportation, and I've been involved in these fights. Not just pollution of the air, but pollution of the water as well. We got a problem at the harbor where the water is so contaminated that marine life cannot survive there and recreation is impossible. I'm concerned about transportation for all people, not just the rapid transit, because that's urgent, but normal transportation. I'm concerned about the matter of jobs, and I've been involved in this fight for jobs and skills training, and I believe that private enterprise must assume a greater share of the burden in providing skills training on the job, so that when a man is hired to seek his training, he will know that when that training is completed that he has a job. I am concerned about the matter of development of private enterprise in the minority communities, owned, operated, and controlled by the people who live there. I think this is absolutely essential. It's absolutely essential if we are to develop a sense of pride, if we are to establish any kind of control over the community. In terms of the matter of the schools, there are many areas that are not strictly within the jurisdiction of the mayor, and I don't see that job as being limited by the charter. I think he has a responsibility to exercise influence, the leadership of his office, the prestige of that office, to get involved in the matter of schools, in the matter of our Board of Education, in the matter of transportation and smog and the others. There is a problem of youth. How do we respond to their needs? Today, I think we are absolutely out of touch with what concerns them. We, for example, plan on a limited basis for what we call a summer program. And when the summer is over and there's even a failure to have an adequate response there, that's the end of the program as far as the mayor is concerned. That has to be a year-round program involving young people in finding out what it is they want and need, and how do we build an effective program to respond to those needs. Now, these are only some of the matters that concern me and that will be a part of this whole campaign discussion. If that's not adequate, I'll carry on. Yes.
You've already partially answered my question. Could you please be very specific and concrete? Exactly how do you intend to be more responsive to the whole community? Are you going to have district offices where you'd come and speak every so often, or send agents, or what?
All right, I'll describe for you my plan and desire as far as communication. I think that we have to, in the first place, establish in the office of the mayor someone who is concerned about consumer protection, so that you're not victimized by merchants, so that you don't have the kind of scandals that occur and we see in our papers all the time. Furthermore, I believe that it's necessary to have a citizen's advocate in the mayor's office who can, in fact, speak for and defend the public interest. We talk about the ombudsman, but so many are turned off by that word that I'm going to call it something different. But the concept is the thing that I believe in. We should not have to turn to our radio station, to Action Line, or to the television station for some kind of response to get them to speak for you. You ought to be able to call City Hall and not just go to several different places in City Hall. You shouldn't have to muster up courage to go down there to seek and answer your problems and feel that you're not going to be received properly or even get a response. But more than that, I think that it's necessary to set up miniature city halls all over the city, not some fancy marble structures or huge buildings of brick and stone, but simple storefronts if necessary, just so that there is something to which people can relate, a place to which they can come, where they can organize on a community level to say what it is they need in their neighborhood, in their community. If it's in terms of services of cleaning the streets or of garbage collection or whatever, it is there that they ought to be able to come and get a quick response. And I think the mayor also needs to go to the various sections of the city and present himself in person to deal with the problems. And the mayor has never yet gone anywhere to hear the grievances of the people. He's never had a confrontation. He'll go for ribbon cutting or for kissing the babies or some kind of ceremonial matter, but never once to deal with the substantive issues that people are concerned about. That's the kind of mayor I will be. And more than that, I suggested to the city council that they conduct that kind of program, to set up a rotating committee that would meet every Saturday and even meet at nights, and even go to the communities to be there where you can hear the complaints. Now, they rejected that idea, but as a mayor, I don't have to get approval from anybody. I'm going to go because that will be a part of the concept as I see that office of mayor.
Mr. Bradley, what specifically do you plan to do about smog in Los Angeles?
The matter of smog is a very complex one. There are many things that I think need to be done. Let me suggest just a couple. There is the question of what kind of fuels should be used. We have discovered in a pilot program that liquid and natural gas are two fuels that produce 60% less smog, produce cleaner automobile engines, cleaner spark plugs, longer life for your automobile, and I see no reason why we shouldn't press for this kind of a fuel. This is only one such experiment, and I'm convinced that if we put enough pressure on the places where the manufacturing is done, we can achieve this result. They are going to suggest, well, it costs a couple of $100. Well, if they do it on a mass basis, installed at the time the automobile is manufactured, they know that they can cut that cost considerably. And anybody would be willing to pay $200 if it's necessary, certainly $100. They don't hesitate about adding a cost to your car to put on a fancy covered dashboard or a steering wheel that buckles out of shape when your chest bangs into it. Why not use that for something that would permit us to walk these streets without crying, or walk the drive down the highways without choking? These are some of the things that need to be done. And we also need a rapid transit system that's going to reduce the number of automobiles on our streets. When you see that in 1980 we will have double the automobile population on our highways today that we have today, from 4 million to 8 million, you can see what a frightening thing it's going to be, not just in terms of traffic, but the amount of pollution that's going to be poured into the air. These are just a couple of things that need to be done. I've been involved already in an effort to seek this kind of research, to see what it is we can do. But I think we then must begin to stir the public to anger so that they put the pressure on Detroit to achieve these changes. Now, we've seen it happen in the past. In connection with the Pure Air Act of 1968, the Senate was rejecting an amendment which would permit California to have stronger regulations for small control devices than the federal level. And that measure was about to go down to defeat. And the radio stations and television stations here in this community stirred up the public to the point where they flooded Washington with letters and telegrams, and they finally passed that amendment and made it possible for stronger regulation. So the public has power. It's a question of somebody leading them, showing them the way, organizing them. Now, we send our Peace Corps volunteers all over the world to organize the disadvantaged people to fight City Hall or their government. But the establishment here doesn't want you to organize here in this country. They reject that idea as being suspicious or something. I say that we need to organize the public in this city to fight whatever the establishment is putting down if it is against the best interest of the public welfare. I'll take one more question, then we have to go.
It's been suggested that a law be passed which would prevent policemen from shooting a person running away from the scene of a crime unless that person is known to be armed or presents a danger to life of the policeman. Now, would you favor such a law?
On the matter of when a police officer should use his gun to shoot, I think there are really only two circumstances when this should be done. We have certain legal limitations, and we often hide behind that. But the real limitation ought to be a moral one as well as legal. And I think that only in circumstances where the officer or someone else's life or safety is endangered is one justification. And the other is when the crime has been so heinous and there's no other means of capturing that suspect should resort to lethal weapons be used. These are the only two circumstances in which I see a real justification for the use of that gun. Now, I have proposed that and suggested it, and we've tried to implement it. I must say that we have not had much response from the police department. I think this needs to be done. I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to come and talk with you today.